My background is at the intersection of education, technology, and cognitive science. So how do people think and learn? How can we best use technology to help people learn? And what are some innovative methods we can use to do that? So we try to integrate all of those together. And a lot of my background on the computer science side is also in artificial intelligence. So I have some experience in that area as well, which is what I'm going to focus on, at least somewhat, in this next talk. I'm with Kaleidoscope Learning in New York, and I also teach at Columbia University, and I'm president of the International E-Learning Association, which is around the a research organization around the world that does a number of conferences and journals and that kind of thing. So thanks for joining me. I want to talk a little bit first about experience. There's an old adage that says experience is the best teacher, and those of you who are here at the beginning of the session, we talked a lot about experience and how people learn from experience, how 70% is learn from experience on the job, as Charles talked about. This is a very useful old adage. All right. Here we go. All right. So let's talk more about learning from experience. Why is that such a good thing? Well, research in education and cognitive science agrees that learning from experience is very much a good thing. People learn well by making decisions, by collaborating, by experimenting, by getting to try things out, by getting to make mistakes and fail, try again. Okay. All this is a very different approach from the kind of learning you get when you memorize something and take a test on it. Right? It's really not the same at all. And you can see the way that this applies to the job, so the way that learning from experience applies to the job. So Charles talked a lot about how learning from experience is the job, right? So you're learning on the job. It's absolutely true. And I'm focusing more on when you've got the time that you are in some sort of training, how can we make sure that that's about experience? And how can we use new technologies and artificial intelligence to put us in position to do that? One of the challenges in any kind of learning experience is getting feedback. And it's really hard in real life, too. In fact, it's sometimes harder in real life. So you can get feedback from the environment, so from a person, or from an object. So, if I'm trying to do some cooking, I can see how well things came out. That's feedback in its own form. I can also get feedback from somebody who is trying the food that I've made, and that's feedback of a different kind. But getting honest feedback is really, really hard. If you cook something and it's terrible, is someone going to tell you? Maybe. Maybe not. Depends on who it is. Depends on how well they know you. If you're in a work situation and you're managing someone and you ask for feedback, you may or may not get honest feedback all the time. Right? I mean, it's sort of the reality of it. You hope you do. You hope you have great relationships and everyone's comfortable, but there are many, many reasons why you may not. There's a power dynamic that's just implicit. There are reasons that people may not want to give honest feedback. They're afraid of what you might say. They just aren't comfortable doing that. So many reasons. You also can get feedback from a coach, and that's a great way to get feedback, right? Athletic teams get this all the time. They've got a coach who's watching them, paying attention, giving them feedback constantly, right? So I watch a lot of sports. I watch a lot of basketball, played basketball growing up, and there's a lot of coaching, and it's really, really valuable. Again, you have to have that relationship to get the most out of the feedback. And if you're a coach, you have to establish a relationship so that your players are going to accept that feedback. So in real-life experiences, this is phenomenally useful, but not always easy to get. So in real-life experiences, as I said, there's no guarantee that you're going to get clear, honest feedback. You might. You'll get some. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. Good guidance and coaching may be difficult to come by. We've all had teachers and coaches and mentors who are fantastic. We've probably all had situations where we didn't get everything we needed from someone who was in a teacher role or a coach role. The other thing about learning from real-life experience is there's no guarantee that you're going to face the experiences that you need to learn how to handle until it's a little bit late, right? Suppose you're a salesperson and you're learning how to overcome complications in closing a deal. If the first time you learn how to do that is in front of a real client, that's not necessarily the best time to learn that because you probably didn't close that deal. It's a great learning experience, but is there a way that you could have that learning experience before the stakes were so high? So ideally, to me, in the online learning world, and I mean that in sort of the broad sense of online learning, not necessarily just computers, but VR, AR, holograms, AI beneath it, all kinds of things. This is going to be a little bit of a futuristic talk in just a minute. We have realistic experiences. You decide, you encounter realistic experiences that feel like the experiences you'll have in real life, on the job. You'll have personalized coaching, guidance, and feedback. You'll have the opportunity to experiment. So I'm going to take a look at a potential future learning experience. And one of the great things about these ideal learning experiences is you can, as the learning experience designer, put people in the situations that they need to face. So you can guarantee that they're going to face a complicated client before they face a real client. You can guarantee that they're going to face a situation that has tremendous consequences. Whatever it is you think they need to learn, you can make sure that they face that. And that's something that you just don't get in real life. There are lots of things that aren't exactly the same about these experiences, but nonetheless. So here's a potential future learning experience. This one's in the world of education. Here's a student who wants to learn about ancient Greece. Here he is in his room. Clicks a button, magically. This is a future learning experience. Some things I'm going to show you we can do today. Some things we're not quite there yet. Magically, he's transformed into looking at ancient Greece and interacting with it. And he can ask his coach, who he has available to him, is that the Acropolis? And the AI coach comes up and says, yes, it is. And actually, she's got more than that. There are a number of buildings known as an Acropolis. The word Acropolis means the highest point. But the Acropolis in Athens, that's the one you know. That's the famous one. You've got it right. It's the Acropolis. So that's nice of her to point those things out. And he can ask, did the Acropolis always look the same over the years? And she says, yeah, we don't know much about the architectural appearance before the Archaic era. She'll tell about the Archaic era, starting in the 8th century BC. Talks about one major addition was when Pisistratus built an entry gate. All right, that's kind of interesting. Take a look. So now she's directing a little bit. Okay, here's the entry gate. He asked who Pisistratus was, so she took a little bit more of the lead in that case. And she gives a little bit more information because he asked the question. So she's driving a little bit of the conversation. He's driving most of the conversation. So he's got someone who can help him and guide him in certain ways and understands kind of when to weigh in and when not to weigh in. She's not ignoring his questions. She's answering his questions. But she's also raising things he might be interested in. Okay? He's got some more comments about how big it is. And suppose we leave the virtual world and we visit Greece today. Suppose he's visiting modern Greece. The coach could come with him. He could be online with other students and collaborating, all sorts of things that you can do with technology helping you with in-person and with an AI coach behind the scenes. So what are some of the key elements of this experience? Okay, so this is kind of a cool experience. One of the big things is it was experiential in a very realistic context, right? So here he got to experience, first of all, something he couldn't experience in real life, which was ancient Greece. And then when he experienced modern Greece, it was in a it was a realistic context. He could also have the coach ask him questions when he's looking at the current state of the world. All of that would be possible. There was coaching guidance. He wasn't alone. One of the challenges when you're going through real life is that you don't always have someone to guide you and help you when you need it. And as I mentioned before, you don't always get the right feedback. So he had coaching guidance, and he had feedback both from a coach and potentially from peers. There's a little bit at the end where he's interacting with his colleagues. So you get feedback in lots of different ways. In certain experiences, you get feedback from the actual environment. He didn't really interact with anything in that kind of way here, but that's something else you could do. And he had control. It's a lot of learner control. But he was assisted and advised. He wasn't completely on his own. One analogy I like to use is the idea of having a restaurant that could make you anything. There's no menu. And on a certain level, that sounds great. And then if you walked into one, you have to look and say, well, okay, first of all, I don't really know what I want. Right? It's an overwhelming decision, as we've had other speakers talk about. Second thing is, well, what's good here? What haven't I tried before? Maybe I'm in the mood to try something new. Who's going to tell me? So many things that you can get out of the right kind of experience is a combination of learner control and crafting. It feels in some ways that over the years, some training evolved from a very top-down approach, right? Like, top of the organization says, this is what we're going to do, everybody's going to listen. Teachers on the stage going to tell you what to do, you remember what they say. And then in the post-web world we went to, well, it's all user-generated, everybody can do what they want. And the answer, I think, is a little bit of everything. The learners are absolutely professionals, they have a lot to offer, they have a lot of expertise, but they're also still learning, we're all still learning. And sometimes we need some guidance, sometimes we need feedback, it depends on what level they're at, but at all different points. I'm always interested, I've been doing this for more years than I'd like to admit, I'm always interested in learning something new, talking to new people, getting different perspectives. And you need a way to get those and a way to be guided toward those. Overall, this is an immersive and personalized experience. So one of the things going on behind the scenes in this imaginary world that I've created is that the coach also gets to know things about the student. So here we had our student, and these weren't just pre-programmed things in the right way that the coach said. These were things that maybe the student might be interested in. So if the coach got to know him, hey, he's interested not just in ancient Greece, but there are certain things that he's interested in particular. Maybe he's interested in philosophy, so she can work in Socrates. Maybe he's interested in language, she can work in language. All kinds of things that you can potentially do as you build up, as a coach, an understanding of the person. Also an understanding of the person's style. How do they like to do things? Some people like to experiment more, some people like to be guided a little bit more. Sometimes it depends on the situation. So we have all of this from an ideal coaching component. So here's where technology intersects with cognitive theory and educational theory. Learning by doing. Situated learning, you're learning in context, in an authentic context, right? So I'm not memorizing facts about Greece and then answering a test. I'm learning about things by experiencing something. Again, coaching, guidance, and feedback. And AI plays a key role here because it provides the guidance and feedback in the right context, and it can learn about and make use of the learner's strengths and weaknesses. So there's a lot now going on in the world of learning analytics, and a lot of that can make use of AI techniques as well. To me, where that really comes into play is, yes, it can evaluate people, but I always tend to worry about a world where everybody's evaluated all the time, and that's all we're doing. Question to me is really, what can we do with that information to give someone a better experience, to help them find interests that they didn't know they had, to continue to keep them interested in things that are relevant and valuable, to make them feel as if they're being listened to? Okay, so again, learning about the learner's interests. I'm a step ahead of myself. How could this work in the workplace? So we've seen a more educational example. Here are a couple of screens. Let's say our same student, when he's not busy learning about ancient Greece and getting his degree or certificate or whatever he's getting, he also works at a retail store. And in this imaginary future, there's a retail store that still kind of looks like the stores of today. So here he is. His bedroom, again, turns into his training, or training room in this case turned into his training. And he interacts with a customer, and he says, hello, can I help you find anything? And he gets a little advice from the coach. Make sure you smile and look friendly. It might be that the coach knows he's not really smiling, because there are sensors we could use to get a sense of that. So it might be the coach is not just saying that that's something to watch, but that the coach actually knows, hey, he's not really doing as well as he could be. All right, so he asks her what he can help her with. She asks if he has this in a size small. He's playing the customer service role. He answers nicely, I'm sure we do, let me check, which is probably the right thing to do. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just jump to the end. Coach says, you did great, but you need to work a little bit more on your facial expressions. So that's a way to work in some of the sensors potentially. She might know that he's got to work on his facial expressions. And then he gets a score at the end of this. So, one of the things that the learning designer part of me agonizes over, is how well do we evaluate people? I was fortunate enough to go to an elementary school when I was a kid where the entire model was very progressive. You did projects, you didn't really memorize anything. We didn't have grades, but we did have evaluations. We had long evaluations. There were regular discussions. It was like having coaches and mentors all the time. And they talked to your parents. You were a little kid. they were very in-depth, but they weren't exactly scores. However, modern day, you expect some scores. So the key is to make the scores about something that really matters. So here the scores are about exactly the kinds of things that you need to be good at if you're good at customer service. And the experience that our student just had, our trainee just had, was very much like what you'd have as a customer service person. So the evaluation is in itself authentic. We're not measuring, did he pick out which from a list of 4 is not a common principle of customer service or not a good one. We didn't ask him to memorize words and fill in the blank. We asked him to perform a task in a realistic way and measured him on key things that you would be measured on. So there really should be a connection, and almost a direct connection, between this kind of evaluation and how you'd be evaluated in doing the job. Key elements, again, experiential learning in a realistic context. Learning by doing, resulting in skill transfer to the job. Right? So we see someone really doing the job in a way that's going to transfer directly. So we're sort of taking, the 10% that's formal learning and making it feel much more experiential. And maybe that changes, how the percentages work too. If you do this, if we can reach that point. Again, we had coaching guidance. And again, we had feedback from a coach, and could be from peers. We didn't actually have peers in this one, but it could be from peers as well. You can imagine others helping. You can imagine others watching this experience. You could imagine questions that you asked someone else. So many ways you could go. And the evaluation was realistic, and it was performance-based. Right? So it was based on how he performed according to realistic measures, doing a very similar job to the one he'd really have to do. And this is a situation where there would be consequences, right? Because if you work for a store and you learn by doing in front of real customers, somebody's going to be unhappy. It's going to be your customers. The store is going to do worse. Someone's going to have a bad experience and not come back. So this is definitely a job that you need to be prepared to do before you're in front of real customers. So there's very much a training need, because that does raise another question that you always kind of want to ask. Is this really a training problem? So this one, to me, is a training problem. Again, learner control, but assisted and advised. So he got to decide how to handle this customer, but he had a coach with him, offering guidance and feedback. And again, it was immersive, and it was personalized. Key advantages. Again, as before, feedback and guidance when you need it. We can construct situations that you may not encounter in real life. So we might have particularly difficult customers. We can make sure he encounters them before he's got to do that in real life. There's always a chance you won't remember everything. There are exception cases. He may not encounter some particular situation until it's 6 months down the road. But you can prepare as much as you can, and you can structure things so people get regular training experiences as well. So this is a critical piece again. You want people to be prepared when the stakes are high. That's not the time you want to have your first learning experience, because you're going to make it, it's going to be costly to the organization. You also can get feedback or insights that you might not get in a real-life experience. So, for example, we could have, and we've done this in sort of some less futuristic scenarios in my own company, we could have the customer come up at the end and say, hey, you know what? Here's what really worked for me about your experience with me. I like the way you were friendly. I like the way you talked to me. I did raise a couple questions that I kind of felt you just answered yes or no and didn't really suggest things I might have wanted to buy. So you could do that. That's not feedback you're ever going to get in real life. The customer is not going to stick around and talk to you. Nobody's really watching, so it's unlikely a manager is going to know, and they're busy with other stuff, and tell you. So you can get that kind of feedback in a realistic way. And that goes in all sorts of ways. It goes back to the manager example I had before. Someone will be comfortable telling you. This simulated character is comfortable telling you anything. Simulated characters do not get embarrassed unless they're programmed to get embarrassed. They're not uncomfortable. They're not shy unless they're programmed to be shy. So they'll tell you. And that's really valuable. One more example. This is a just-in-time example. I've talked about training. Here's one where you get this kind of experience, but it's helping you just in time when you really do have a client. In this case, you have a very cute client. You're a veterinarian. The AI coach jumps in and says, based on some information from the sensors. So we've got some sensors here too. You might want to check her right back paw to see if she has a cut. And I could go ahead and do that. That's something that, as a good veterinarian, I might have thought about, but I wouldn't have all this information. The AI coach has some information that is consolidating for me that I might not otherwise have. Okay. Next up. Okay. The veterinarian, this is the veterinarian, may say, I think I see a spot on her ear. Not sure if I could be concerned about it. She can get advice from an oncologist colleague who's online. I biopsy it just to be safe. I think it's likely not to be anything. So you can get collaboration online in this imaginary world, which again, not necessarily so far away if we design things a certain way. So that one's a little bit briefer. Just-in-time performance support, coaching guidance in real time, integrating sensors and other technologies, real-time collaboration with colleagues. And then to wrap up, I'll leave some time for questions. Ideally, to me, if we reimagine learning experiences using technology, a lot of how we want to use technology is to think about what we can do. So not just take the experiences that we've seen and try to mirror them, but to think about what can we do differently. If we have sensors, we have wearables, what can we do with those? We have AI behind the scenes, what can we do? Not just use AI to help evaluate people, but to help get people in the experiences that are really going to make them comfortable, make them feel like it's something they really, really want to do. So much of learning evolves from what traditional schools become. Interestingly, if you go way back in time, people learned by doing as apprentices, right? You go way back to the early days. People learned to be blacksmiths by working with an expert blacksmith. And they learned by doing. First, they'd start cleaning. Then they get promoted to maybe, holding the poker in the fire or something. They would do a little bit at a time and get better and better. They've had advice. Schools really evolved because they didn't scale up. There was no other way to scale up apprenticeships. You really didn't have enough experts. You didn't have enough time. The school model was never really intended to be the best one. It's the one that most people are familiar with. And with technology, we can create unbelievable experiences with the technology we have now, and it's just getting better, that scale up. We create this AI coach, which we're getting closer to being able to do, and we can do some parts of it now. It works as well on 1 million people or 10 million people as it does on one. And it puts learning in a different light, and it puts learners in a different light. I think culturally as well. Almost no one really wants to be told, memorize this and take a test. I know I don't. But I do want to learn, and we want to set things up so that learning feels like something that people are doing all the time and feels like something that it really is relevant and meaningful to them. This is where technology can come in and humanize things and not dehumanize them, and it's so easy for it to go the other way. But this is an example of how we can humanize things. Leverage new technologies, definitely including AI, in ways that create learning experiences that are enjoyable and motivating. Make it relevant for people, give them control, and they're going to be a lot more motivated. It feels a lot less like a chore. Okay? Create the right kinds of challenges. People are motivated by challenge, but it's not only that. And you want to be challenged to do something that you think is meaningful. If we use technology to create the right experience, everything is scalable. As I said just a minute ago, can do it for 1,000 people, 1 million people, 10 million people, just as easily as we could do it for one person. And to me, that's the beauty of what technology can be and what we can do with it, and where some of the things that I just showed are things we can do today, some of the things are maybe not so far away, and I think all of them can drive the design of the experience design that we look at in today's world. All right. So on that note, thank you so much for spending the last 25 minutes or so with me. If you want to reach me, I'm on LinkedIn as well. I'm on the following places. Also do have a book out about these things on Amazon if you feel like searching for that. It's not out yet, but it's almost out. So that's another way to see some more about this. Should be out, I think, in June, though Amazon says August. So thanks again, and there's time for a question or two if people have questions. Okay, someone has to, because I can't share my own questions. I can't make up questions for myself.
Yes, I have a question. So, how do you accompany the public? Sorry for my English. To be comfortable with the technology, to be ready to be trained on this.
The audience?
Yes.
So the question is how, so when you have something that's new technologically, how do you get the audience to be comfortable? No, I think that's a great question. Part part of the answer to me is actually designing something that feels natural to people, right? So part of it really lies on the side of the designer. So what can you do to put people in a situation that feels natural and good to them? So we've actually had a lot of experience where we rolled out something even in the older days that seemed new and different, but it felt natural, so people were okay with it. And maybe that wasn't what everyone was expecting. There are things that feel more radical, and that's definitely a trick too. I was at another conference last week with financial services learning and development professionals. We talked a lot about virtual reality. And one of the major banks had rolled out a VR thing, and it had actually gone really, really well. But there was definitely a concern among a lot of people that not everybody feels great about VR. So there were some things that people, might want to do, like, okay, get people comfortable, do something short. And this was one thing with something that's new, especially with VR, because it can make you dizzy. So something like that, definitely start with something that's a smaller experience and get people comfortable. And so I think that's another key thing that you want to do. You could study ancient Greece for hours. You could, take care of customers for a long time if we set it up that way. But you probably would want to start people with something new in smaller doses and get them more comfortable with it, especially people who aren't necessarily great new technology adopters. But I think you do come at it from both ends. So I do think a lot of it is, think really hard about what you're creating so that people feel comfortable with it. And then on the other side, think about how you can roll it out, probably starting a little bit slowly, especially with something that's a little bit more radical. VR came up in particular because of the goggles and because it's just such a different experience that some people really did say, hey, this makes me dizzy. Actually the guy from the U.S. bank that was showing the example, it was a panel I was doing, one of the VR experiences they had was a bank robbery. And it actually seemed really, really cool. Like, it seemed really cool and realistic. And one of the things he said they had to watch out for is that some people actually found it a little bit emotionally difficult because it did feel so real. And that's something else to think about too is, is it, he was worried it was going to be traumatic for people. He actually chose not to show much of that demo at this conference because he was worried about traumatizing the audience. I think that might have been too extreme, but imagine that in a VR headset. And, there's a question about how you set expectations, and that's a harder thing too. Like, ideally, you wouldn't want to tell someone a bank robbery is coming because a lot of what you're learning is how to handle the unexpected situation. But you do get into something different if that might be more, might actually be traumatic. You don't want to have traumatized employees because they just experienced a bank robbery so realistic that now they're, afraid to, show up to work the next day. So that was an interesting and complicated thing that goes along with this. So that's a great question. Okay, time for one more. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Really interesting. And I wanted to ask a question on the second example that you gave around the just-in-time learning. I can see huge potential with that, but one thing that kind of sticks is how do you integrate that into the experience? If you're sitting in front of a client or in front of a dog, you don't want to be on your phone or on the computer asking questions and not interacting with your client. So how do you integrate it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that's evolving over time. I think you probably could get some mileage out of having a screen up, and I think that would not necessarily, in this situation, maybe not be the worst thing, especially the veterinary example is a little bit easy in that way because one of the many things we love about dogs is they're not going to get bothered, right? So if you have, if you're a physician, someone may feel like, why aren't you paying attention to me? If you have a dog, well, they will feel, why aren't you paying attention to me? But they're a little bit more lenient about it. So there's that. I think what's going to happen over time is technology should help us. Google Glass was theoretically something that was going to do that. Google's supposedly coming out with an updated version. We'll see how that goes. Things that are projected in different ways, more along the lines of what we saw from the student, might help us. So I think we might start to see, and we should start to see, more of an integration of, really this would be an augmented reality world, right? So it would be augmenting the real world that you're in and sort of a mixed view of what things are. And so that is, getting back to her question, something that I think people will have to get, it will take time for people to get comfortable with. And there will be some time for that to happen. But I think that over time, we will get there, and over time, technology will help us make this feel more natural. Some of this probably feels jarring now, and some of it will feel jarring to some people. I mean, there are some people who, even today's technology feels jarring, and some people are more comfortable. So it's a great question. I think there's a lot that goes with how it evolves and rolls out that's going to matter a lot too. But I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. All right. Well, I think that is it for my time. Thank you so much for spending the time with me. And stick around. We've got more coming up. So stick around. We're going to turn over to the next speaker.